of Management Studies IGNOU presents an audiobook on the course Mmpc 015 Research Methodology for Management Decisions for MBA program. Presenting Block 4 Report Writing and Presentation, Unit 12 Substance of Reports.
Objectives. After reading this unit, you should be able to discuss the subject matter of various types of reports. 2. Prepare a proposal for any type of report. And 3. Review and edit the draft of a report. Introduction. Report writing is common in both academic and managerial situations. In academics, reports are used for comprehensive and application-oriented learning. Student reports are called term papers, project reports, thesis, and dissertations depending on the nature of the report, the time and effort expected of the student, and the curriculum design. Further, researchers put out their initial findings in a research report, paper, or monograph, which is later condensed into an article or expanded into a series of articles or a book. In organizations, reports form the basis for decision making. These reports are expected to be brief but comprehensive and reflect the thinking of the manager, the management committee, or the consulting group that has been given the terms of reference for fact-finding or decision making. Proposal. Preparation of reports is time-consuming and expensive. Therefore, reports have to be very sharply focused on purpose, content, and readership. And to control the final outcome of the product, whether it is a research report, committee, consulting administrative report, or student report, it is often preceded by a proposal and its acceptance or modification, and periodic interim reports and their acceptance or modification by the sponsor. A proposal gives information on the following items. 1. Descriptive title of the study. 2. Names of author and their background. 3. Nature of the study, problem to be examined, significance and need for the study, background information available, scope of the study extent and limitations, to whom will it be useful. 4. Hypothesis, if any, to be tested. 5. Data, sources, collection procedure, methodology for analysis. 6. Equipment and facilities required. 7. Schedule target dates for completing. Library research, primary research, data organization and analysis, outlining the report, first draft, final draft. 8. Likely product or tentative outline. 9. Cost estimates. 10. Bibliography. Categories of report. 1. Decision reports. 2. Problem. 3. Constructing the criteria. 4. Generating and evaluating the options. In generating options, creativity is required. Sometimes the options are obvious, but one can look beyond the obvious. Once a set of options have been generated, they are shortlisted and ranked by priority or their probability of meeting the objectives identified in the problem definition. Then the options are evaluated against the criteria and possible implications in implementation without losing track of the main objective of what the situation should be. The evaluation process demands logical and critical thinking. The presentation of evaluation is structured by criteria or options depending upon which structure is easy to understand. For instance, if the criteria are few and options are many, the presentation will be easy to understand if it is structured by criteria. But if the options are few and the criteria are many, the presentation will be effective if it is structured according to options. 5. Making a decision. The decision or recommendation flows out of the evaluation of the options, provided the thinking process has been logical so far. The recommendation should be an adequate response to the problem and implementable. 6. Drawing up an action plan. Even the best analysis can go waste if attention is not paid to the action plan. The action steps and their consequences should be visualized to avoid being caught unawares. Be clear of who does what, when, where, and how. Even at this stage, we have to go through the problem-solving steps in futuristic scenario. What problems do we anticipate? What objectives and criteria would we like to pursue? What options would be open to us? And what choices can we make under what circumstances? 7. Working out a contingency plan. Administrators, executives, and managers thrive on optimism and confidence to get things done. Yet, if something can go wrong, it is likely to go wrong. They should have their parachute ready to bail out. The contingency plan must emerge from the action plan. There is a need to think of how to achieve the second best objective if the first one is not feasible. 8. Conclusion. The problem-solving approach helps only when one can question oneself again and again at every stage and bring to bear various thought processes to do a comprehensive analysis and synthesis. Then only will the administrator, executive, or manager be able to genuinely share his or her thoughts with the reader. If the problem-solving approach and steps are used merely as a form of filling exercise, a superficial analysis and report will result. An attractive package does not necessarily mean a good product. An executive report is not a summary of the view and information that a decision maker has elicited, but an analysis and synthesis of an integrated decision or recommendation. Thinking through a decision-making situation is an iterative act. A good decision report is structured sequentially but reflects comprehensively the iterative thinking process of the decision makers. 9. Research reports. Research reports contribute to the growth of subject literature. They pave the way for new information, significant hypotheses, and innovative and rigorous methods of research and measurement. They broadly have the following organization. A. Literature survey to find gaps in knowledge. B. Nature and scope of the study, hypothesis to be tested, and significance and K utility of the study. C. Methodology for collecting data, conducting the experiment, and analyzing the data. D. Description and analysis of the experiment and data. E. Findings. F. Conclusions. G. Recommendations. H. Suggestions for further research. I. Backup evidence and data. Reviewing the draft. The report should be thoroughly reviewed and edited before the final report is submitted. The following questions will help to review the draft. 1. Author's purpose. 2. Reader's profile. 3. Content. 4. Language and tone. 5. Length. 6. Appearance. Author's purpose. The lack of clarity and explicitness in the communication purpose leads to two major problems. A. Confusion in determining the mix of content, language and tone, length and looks, and B. Misinterpretation of the message. Reader's profile. The readership may consist of one or more persons or one or more groups. If more than one person or segment is involved, check whether all of them are on the same wavelength. If not, segregate the common interest areas from the special interest ones. Then, decide on the types and parts of the report which can satisfy various reader groups. Think of the organization and social membership and hierarchical level of the reader. An executive writing a report, for instance, should know whether the reader is an insider or an outsider to the organization or the cultural system, an immediate boss or a boss who is 2 or 3 rungs removed, a colleague or a subordinate. An understanding of the reader on these lines helps the author to modulate the content, language, and tone to suit the reader. The major discriminating features of the reader's profile are cultural, social, religious, ideological, educational, economic, and age. Also, pay attention to the reader's interest and familiarity with the subject and the language. Otherwise, you may be pitching the communication either too high or too low. Content. The content is the crucial communication axle between the author and the reader. Attention should be given to the content's focus, its organization, the accuracy of facts, and the logic of arguments. These are discussed as focus. Failure to prune and polish the content's focus make the report as diffused as an amateur's photograph. All the wisdom of an author cannot be wrapped up in a few pages. Only the essentials required for the purpose can be covered. The focus should be clarified right in the first few paragraphs to attract the reader's attention and hold it. This is the first and last chance to catch the reader's attention. The main theme, presentation scheme, author's purpose, and intended readership should be indicated right in the beginning. The appropriate style and tone of the language should be set into motion right from the first sentence and be kept up till the end. Organization. The focus is the foundation for the rest of the content. If any material is added or deleted in the text, check the focus delineated in the beginning to see whether any changes are required in the foundation. If needed, change either the focus or the text to get consistency. Otherwise, different messages may emerge from the communication and confuse the reader. Then ensure that 1. The discussion is organized step by step into parts, subparts, and paragraphs. 2. The arguments of each section and paragraph flow smoothly into the next one. And 3. Too many ideas are not crammed into one section. To check that the various parts of the report and ideas are sequenced effectively, constantly ask whether a different sequence would be easier for the reader's comprehension. Examine the structure of paragraphs. The most recommended structure for paragraphs in recent years has been the inverted pyramid style. First, this style calls for putting forward the most important point first and then going down in priority. The idea is to put forward as much essential information as possible to the readers before their attention wavers or is lost. Second, the style calls for putting forward the conclusion first or the main topic or theme in the very first sentence of the paragraph and then substantiating or supporting it with information and evidence in the order of priority beginning with the most essential or important at the top. The idea is that even if the reader skims through the first sentences of paragraphs, he or she should be able to get the gist of the content. Accuracy of facts. Authors can lose their credibility if they fail to check the accuracy of facts, figures, quotations, and references. A discerning reader can easily check the internal consistency of the report by comparing information across pages and sections. Evaluation of information. Decision makers often lack data or information. Not all that they want is available. Therefore, they have to constantly ask, what is the minimum data required for the decision? What is available? What can be got within the available time and money? And what cannot be obtained? Sometimes they have to make assumptions to fill up the gaps. Facts, figures, and opinions have to be interpreted to become evidence for throwing light on an issue. Facts and figures do not speak for themselves. Only their interpretation makes an argument. For effective communication, logic is a dependable tool in convincing the reader of the reasonableness of the points of view. But how can we make sense of confusing and constantly changing situations? How can we recognize the unreasonableness of the seemingly reasonable arguments? We can do it by A. Analyzing the situation, B. X-raying the facts through their smokescreen words, opinions, and assumptions, C. Examining the inference process, and D. Capsulizing and concretizing the ideas. Situational analysis. What is good in one situation may not necessarily be so in another, and that one situation may appear to be similar and yet be different. We have to list and arrange the elements and the actors of a situation to understand the dynamics of the situation. We can map out the territory on the basis of who did and said what to whom. Elements which shape a situation could be of various kinds. The decision to buy or not to buy a new machine, the decision to postpone the decision on the new machine, installing or not installing the new machine, decision to buy from one and not the other, XYZ companies quoting different prices for the same product, the government's decision to make a statutory requirement of giving X amount of bonus, the company's offer of Y amount of bonus to its employees, workers threatening to go on a strike, the boss having a poor opinion about the subordinate, X having certain image in the company, X being granted leave while Y has been refused leave, X telling Y that Z is a fine fellow, all such elements shape a situation. Actors in a situation also matter. The managing director's request often get treated as an order, a colleague's request remains a request, and a subordinate's request remains in the basket for consideration in due course of time. If 2 or 3 workers ask for a change in timings, the manager may not consider the event as serious. If 80% of the workers ask for it, the significance drastically changes, the manager will hasten to find a solution. In arranging the elements and actors, we can try to understand the rules of the game, opportunities and threats inherent in the situation. If a strike is on, for example, we can identify the areas of agreement and disagreement, items on which the management will bend its back to avoid a strike, items on which the management's tail will be up, and power that the management can and cannot draw from the government and the situation within the country or the timing of the happening. It is such opportunities and threats which help the management to form the strategy for a solution. In arranging the elements of a situation, we must check whether the element is relevant to the situation. If it is, we consider it in ordering the elements. If not, we ignore it. For example, at the year end, when the financial statements are being prepared, the death of the chief accountant may contribute to a serious situation. But the death of a worker will be inconsequential. However, if a company has launched a family planning program for its workers, the death of even a worker due to an operation can jeopardize the whole program. But the death of even the managing director in such a situation will be inconsequential. The elements of a situation can be structured along the following dimensions depending on the situation: A. Time, B. Space, C. Quantity, D. Quality, E. Cost, and F. Hierarchy. Each dimension offers a two-pronged fork: A. The relationship of the element to others, and B. The magnitude of the element itself. The time sequence among elements helps in understanding the situation. If production has been going down, for instance, it is possible to attribute its cause to a new procedure that has been introduced. But if production drop was noticed even before the procedure was introduced, the latter cannot be the cause for the former. At the most, it could have aggravated the problem. Moreover, finding out the events at the starting point of the production may help in focusing attention on the causes of the problem. An understanding of the spatial arrangement of elements adds to the understanding of the situation. For example, if 3 plants A, B, and C, in that order, are in a straight line at different distances, we know that plant B is between plant A and plant C. If they are located in a triangle, plant A could be at equidistance from plant B and plant C. If we are planning for a common processing facility at a central plant, we know that we can locate the facility in plant B in the first case and in plant A in the second case. Moreover, the information about the space available in each plant helps us to check whether it matches the space required for the new facility. Similarly, each element can be ranked according to quantity and quality, and each element's available quantity and quality can be checked against the requirement. The cost dimension helps, like the earlier 4 dimensions, in ranking elements and comparing each element against the requirement. But it has the third fork. It can also provide an all-inclusive comparative picture of various elements. The cost dimension can include within it the time, space, quantity, and quality dimensions when they are quantified in money terms. Finally, the hierarchical dimension is the most difficult one to understand and pinpoint. The elements and actors in this dimension are constantly changing. Today's colleague may be tomorrow's boss. Hierarchical positions within the company will broadly indicate the authority, power, influence, and responsibility each actor wields. Moreover, the secretary to the boss sometimes commands power which is not reflected by his or her position in the organizational chart. The structuring of elements and actors across different dimensions helps in examining various elements and their relationships and in focusing on the decision-making area or the problem. X-raying of facts. Facts often get shaded by 3 smokescreen words: opinions and assumptions. The hazy picture of facts that we get at first sight gives us the feeling that we have understood the facts. Yet, the real shape of the facts eludes unless we x-ray the facts through the smoke screens. Unless we understand the facts in their real form, our conclusions may be way off the reality. The meaning of the same word for the writer and the reader may be different. If a company says that its staff is disciplined, what does it mean? Does it mean that they have a high commitment to work, a task, or a cause? Does it mean that they are obedient yes men? Does it mean that they are punctual? Does it mean that they are faithful and loyal? Does it mean that they are polite? It could mean some of these, all of these, or something else that the company considers a discipline. Can we break through this smokescreen of discipline to find out what the reality is? Opinion is another smokescreen which envelopes fact. When a personnel manager, for example, says that Mr. X is 58 years old and he will be retiring in another 2 years, the statements can be checked. One can cross-check from Mr. X's personal file whether he is 58 and from the company policy whether the retirement age for the employee is 60. But when the personnel manager writes about Miss Y, who is being considered for a training program, then she is too old to learn. The age of Miss Y can be anywhere, say, between 21 and 60. In fact, the opinion of the personnel manager may have been based on observations other than age. Therefore, facts and observations on which this opinion has been based need to be ascertained before agreeing or disagreeing with the personnel manager's recommendation. The third smoke screen is made up of assumptions. When there is a gap in the information or uncertainty about future events, we make assumptions, which if they are not recognized as assumptions, escape the scrutiny and pass off as facts. Assumptions can be of two kinds, illustrative and critical. An illustrative assumption helps to describe a process or a result concretely so that further arguments can be built. For example, if the price of product X is 10 rupees per piece and an excise levy of 10% ad valorem is assumed, the effective price to the customer is 11 rupees. If the taxes are 20%, the effective price is 12 rupees. Here, the assumptions about the percentage of excise duty are made to explain how the effective price to the customer will vary depending on the percentage of tax. However, if a company feels that the demand of its product will remain unchanged at a price of 11 rupees but will fall drastically at 12 rupees, it will seriously think before the budget session of the parliament about the impact of change in the tax structure. If it assumes the rate at 10%, it has no cause for worry. If it assumes that the rate will be 20% or between 10 and 20%, it has to examine the impact of tax on demand for the product. Therefore, the assumption in this situation about the likely tax rate is critical because it affects the decision. Then, how can we penetrate the smoke screens to see the facts as they are? A three-pronged attack may be useful. First, concretize all general statements. Second, check against the actual. Third, examine contradictions in the evidence. Statement qualified by general words like all, almost all, most, the majority, the minority, few, and some can distort the picture of the actual situation. When a company says that the majority of its employees are satisfied workers, it may mean that 251 workers out of 500 are happy. The arithmetic is correct, but the representation of the gravity of the situation is doubtful. When a company says that only a few of its employees are disgruntled and does not reveal that these few are the opinion leaders, it may not be projecting the true picture. General adjectives or qualifying words hide facts. When a manager says that X is a good employee or an average employee, it is not clear what X is capable of doing or not doing. We can arrive the actual profile of X only when the manager spells out concretely what is meant by good and whether X has been actually rated against those criteria. However, labels like good, average, and bad keep floating unchallenged. Having concretized the generic words to understand what is actually meant, check whether the so-called facts are real facts. When someone, for example, claims that he/she belongs to XYZ category and hence eligible for a certain privilege, ascertain whether he or she really belongs to the privileged category or not. Often rules and procedures are quoted by memory to help or hinder someone. Check whether such a rule or procedure really exists. Or, had existed and changed over time, or is being anticipated to be introduced, or never existed except in the mind of the person quoting it. Often, we come across contradictory observations about an item when only one of them can be true. For example, X may report that machine Y has broken down, but Z may report that machine Y is in working condition. The contradiction needs to be examined. Maybe X and Z are talking about two different machines, or X and Z are talking of two jobs of which the machine at present can do one and cannot do the other, or X and Z are picking on each other. Unless such contradictions of facts are recognized and challenged, facts will continue to elude and delude us. Inference process. The first step in examining the inference process is to understand the cause and effect relationship. When a company, for example, begins to lose its market share, the marketing manager investigates with the assumption that there is a cause or a set of causes underlying the loss of market share. Unless the cause is clearly understood, the attempt to change the effect is likely to be a shot in the dark. The next step is to draw conclusion from facts and observations through deductive and inductive reasoning processes. Deductive inference. If a universal or general principle is known or has been proved to be true, conclusions can be drawn from it about individuals falling in that universe. Let us take an example. 1. No leave was granted to the employees of company X on a certain date. 2. Y is an employee of company X. 3. Therefore, Y was not granted leave on that date. In using this kind of reasoning, we should make sure that the universal principle is true and the linkage between the universal principle and the individual is relevant. Otherwise, the conclusion drawn in a particular situation may or may not be valid. If some employees were granted leave and some were not, we cannot be sure into which category Y falls. Much worse will be in the situation if Y is not an employee of the company. The universal principle stated will then have no relevance to Y, and therefore it cannot be concluded definitely whether Y was granted leave or not. Inductive inference. When universal or general principles are not available, conclusions are drawn on the basis of observations of individual units in a universe. The basic assumption in inductive reasoning is that the particular units partake of the universal character. If a company, for example, wants to find out the customer reaction to a new product or service, one method is to ask all the customers about it. But the number of customers may be so large that the company has to resort to sampling. From the sample reaction, it can then generalize or interpret the likely response to the new product or service. When inductive inference is being drawn from sampling, we must guard against some loopholes. First, is the sample relevant? Second, is the method right? Third, the existence of causes other than the ones identified cannot be ruled out without careful scrutiny. For example, a manager may generalize that the employees want job security because some of them had left the company for lower wages. Another manager may conclude from talking to the same workers that they left because they lived in far-off places from the plant. Fourth, opinions may change. Therefore, feedback collected today may not necessarily hold good tomorrow when the action is taken. Capsulization and concretization. Capsulization involves both A. Miniaturization of the main theme and identification of high points of evidence and arguments. B. Chewing ideas bit by bit. It dispels the fog or impression that long-winded arguments or lengthy reports create. By understanding the main ideas and the main points in a nutshell or a skeleton form, we can map out the territory and identify the traps. Concretization involves the use of A. Specific words and B. Visualization. The statement that plant A is 10 km away from plant B is more specific than plant A is very far or quite close to plant B. Instead of saying that the new policy of the government is generally favorable or generally unfavorable to the organization, we can specify the implications, say in rupees and paise. We can translate the favorableness or unfavorableness through the balance sheet and the income statement. We can specify in implementation terms the new opportunities and threats to our business. Traps of logic. In playing the trap detection game, we should recognize the following common traps. 1. Avoidance. 2. Diversion. 3. Stacking the deck. and 4. Either or. The avoidance trap can be recognized when one begins by saying, I am not concerned with, or how am I concerned with? Another form of avoidance is what is commonly known as pass the buck. The buck could be passed upwards, downwards, or sideways. All of us play it to avoid taking the decision or applying ourselves to the problem on hand. The more sophisticated form of avoidance is the much can be said on both sides technique used when one has to make a choice. The diversion trap operates mainly by diverting the attention from the main theme or argument. One diversionary technique is to sidetrack the main issue. If the general manager is discussing a strike on hand with the plant manager, the latter may fritter away the time by talking about the general climate or history of unionism in the country, or general absenteeism of the workers, or the promotion of a person in another plant, or for that matter, he or she may talk about the weather. Another kind of diversion can be provided by emotional appeal. Both management and the union use the technique by appealing to fairness, prestige, and prejudice. Appeals and insinuations on both sides divert attention from the real issue. If a case of reinstatement of an employee who has been fired for malpractice is discussed, the real issue of whether the employee has been guilty or not is wrapped up in emotional terms of victimization. Another diversionary tag is to project self-confidence, a tool often used by salesmen. The way the salesman talks or carries himself may numb the purchase manager from examining whether the selling company can provide after-sales service or some critical issues before making the purchase. One more diversionary technique is to cite an authority. The chairman or the managing director wants it done this way, or all the world is over, it is done that way, or the Bible, whatever book you swear by says so, are common indicators of this technique. Stacking the deck trap is sprung by citing only facts that support an argument and ignoring unfavorable ones. A manager who is interested in promoting subordinate X may quote facts which help to build X's case and suppress the weak points. Moreover, the weak points of the other contenders may be highlighted and their plus points blanked out. Similarly, a purchase manager who is interested in helping a supplier may stack up all plus points of the favored supplier and all the minus points of the suppliers. Moreover, the manager may gloss over contradictions in the recommendation. Supplier X may be rejected for inability to provide after-sales service. But in the same breath, supplier Y may be recommended without telling his or her inability also to provide the expected after-sales service. The either-or trap is aimed at limiting the thinking to only two choices without proving that only two choices are feasible in a given situation. The attention is fixed only to black or white and is not allowed to examine the possibilities of grey areas or any other color. Either one is a friend or an enemy, all other possibilities are ruled out. When a manager argues that product A is to be bought from supplier X or supplier Y, the mind is closed to the choice of a mix or a supplier Z. Of course, such an argument becomes valid if it is proven that neither grey nor any other color exists in the given situation. Language and tone. Since the purpose of communication is to make the reader understand the message, use the vocabulary and sentence structures which the reader understands. The terminology and language structures of a subject specialist are not familiar to non-specialists. Even among the specialists, sometimes there are differences in the usage of terminology and language structures. For effective communication, the author has to climb down or climb up to the reader's level, a difficult adjustment for many of us to make. Abstract phrases are difficult to comprehend. Concrete phrases are easy to understand. For example, a word like freedom is abstract unless it is followed by a definition or an example. This is better or that is good or bad are often made judgments. But the reader finds it difficult to understand better than what or good or bad by what criteria. Generic adjectives and adverbs sabotage the effectiveness of communication. For example, instead of merely stating that XYZ company is a large company, the author can also indicate the various dimensions, which lead to the conclusion that the company is large. Finally, the tone of the language also matters. It can make the reader receive, ignore, or reject the message. Executives have to differentiate and modulate the tone of writing to superiors, peers, and subordinates. Length. How long should the report be This is a matter to be judged by the author, keeping in mind the purpose, the subject, and the reader's interest. The shorter the content, the more attractive it is to the reader. But it cannot be so brief as to miss the essential points and the linkages in the flow of arguments and force the reader to ask for more information. If the length does not match with the reader's interest and patience, the author has to rework and scale down the purpose, the focus, or the content. Check the readability of paragraphs. As a thumb rule, paragraphs should not exceed 8 typed lines, sentences should not exceed more than 3 typed lines, and punctuated pauses should not go over 2 typed lines. In short, communication should be like a capsule. It should be small enough to swallow, but powerful enough to act. Here are a few suggestions to save words. 1. Cut out repetition unless they are meant for sharpening the message. 2. Take out redundancies. 3. Use active voice. 4. Use shorter and direct verbs. 5. Eliminate weighty expressions. 6. Make concrete adjectives. 7. Strike out it and there. 8. Use abbreviations which are more familiar than their expanded forms. 9. Use pronouns wherever possible. If confusion arises, clarify the pronoun by name or by words like former or latter. Note the modern trend of avoiding the usage of he alone as a generic pronoun unless if suits the context. If a generic pronoun is needed, use he, she, or rephrase the sentence to drop it, or use plural nouns and pronouns. 10. Use the full name of a person at the first reference, then use only the short name, preferably the last name in the formal report. Appearance. The novelty or presentation is as important as the originality of ideas. Both are products of creativity and criticalness. Presentation attracts the readers and the content holds their attention. Both the product and the package are equally important. Summary. In this unit, we have discussed the steps involved in the preparation of a proposal for a report. 3 categories of reports, namely information reports, decision reports, and research reports have been explained. The steps involved in writing various types of report are also discussed. Before a final report is submitted, the report should be thoroughly reviewed and edited. The unit concludes by answering certain questions for reviewing the draft of a report.
You were listening to the audiobook by the School of Management Studies IGNOU for MBA program. Course code Mmpc 015 Research Methodology for Management Decisions. Course Coordinator Dr. Venkataya Chittipaka, Associate Professor from School of Management Studies IGNOU. Voiceover by Renuka. Edited by Savita. Program assisted by Tarannum Jahan and Jagbandhu Jana. Program produced by Dr. Manoj Kumar Singh. This program was brought to you by Electronic Media Production Center of Indira Gandhi National Open University.